Hello again, everyone. This is Grant Hogue from the Boston Children's Hospital, and we are on the Scoliosis Dialogues, the official podcast of the Scoliosis Research Society. We are going to continue our conversations with new board members, and right now we have Dr. Ying from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I'm not only lucky to have you on today, but really lucky to have you as a friend. So thanks for coming on with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, and so, Ying, let's kind of jump right into this, and maybe you can give all of the listeners an idea of your kind of education and academic history, and maybe also some of your primary mentors in orthopedics or spine surgery.
Sure. So I guess one interesting fact about me is that I'm a former ballerina. So I was a ballerina for 12 years, and I thought that I would continue to do that professionally, but then I realized that a ballerina's career is pretty short, so I decided to go to college and medical school. So I received a degree in genetics at Dartmouth College. And then I completed medical school at Wake Forest University School of Medicine in North Carolina. And I stayed at Wake Forest for my orthopedic surgery residency. Next, I completed a pediatric orthopedic surgery fellowship at Boston Children's. And now I've been on faculty at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor since 2011.
It's excellent. And who do you think, or who would you say influenced you the most to pursue your career in orthopedics or even pediatric spine surgery?
So in terms of orthopedics, I was probably one of the rare people who went to medical school knowing that I wanted to do orthopedic surgery. And that was in large part because of my history as a ballerina. Initially, I thought I wanted to do orthopedic sports medicine and take care of athletes. Then I realized that I didn't like standing in a cold puddle of water all day scoping. And there are some changes with the structure of my residency when I was an intern. So I actually did an extra junior resident rotation on pediatrics. And so I got exposed to pediatric spine surgery early on. I think I really like instrumentation. I love deformity correction. Didn't really like degen, so adult spine really wasn't something that attracted me. And when I did my senior rotation on peds as a resident, it solidified my interest in pediatric orthopedics and specifically spinal deformity surgery. You had asked earlier in terms of mentors. I would say certainly for many of us who trained at Boston Children's, John Emmons for sure was one of my primary mentors when I was a fellow. And it was just really amazing to see all that he had accomplished throughout his career. Just the cases that he took on were very, very interesting and really thought-provoking. But certainly all the pediatric spine faculty that I worked with at Boston Children's, I called mentors during my fellowship and still would consider them mentors now.
Fantastic. And so now that you're taking on this new role within the SRS on the board of directors, how did you first become involved in the SRS, and what other positions have you held?
Well, since I knew early on that pediatric spinal deformity surgery was my calling, certainly as soon as I finished my training and I was able to become a candidate member of SRS, I joined. And then after I had completed the requirements to be a candidate member and could move on to active member, I did so as soon as I could. In terms of involvement in SRS, certainly I think it's important to find your niche and not to overextend yourself. So while I am involved in different organizations, SRS just really felt like my home. I mean, that sounds kind of cheesy, but I think the reason why I like SRS is because everybody who joins obviously is interested in spinal deformity surgery, but also research. But I also find that as a pediatric spine surgeon, I learned so much from my adult spinal deformity colleagues as well, and I wouldn't have those same interactions at some of the other meetings that are more pediatric focused. I've been involved in several committees through SRS, including the Outcomes and Benchmarking Committee. Prior to that, that was the Morbidity and Mortality Committee, so I was chair of that committee for a few years. I was also chair of the Growing Spine Committee before that committee got sunsetted. I was in the inaugural cohort of the LEAD program, which certainly was a great way to get to know not just other budding leaders within SRS, but also to get to know the presidential line and the board of directors of SRS more.
So, talk to me a little bit about the LEAD program. It's fairly new. It's only been going on a few years, but it always seems like a hot topic, and everyone that has gone through the program speaks incredibly highly about it. So, what do you think was most useful, and what would you run as a commercial to try to get everybody else to apply?
So what was really great about LEAD was that, not just that exposure to the presidential line and the board of directors, but also to, again, break out of my little niche of pediatric orthopedic spine surgery. So, it's a small group, so we see each other all the time at these various meetings. But the nice thing about LEAD is I got to meet adult spine deformity surgeons and also neurosurgeons. And so, certainly, although we all take care of spinal deformity, we all have slightly different thought processes, and it's really always eye-opening just to talk to people who have different backgrounds than you. And some of the programming too, obviously wasn't just focused on medicine, but focused on areas that can make you a better leader that I would not normally have access to unless I was involved in this type of leadership program.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that really jumps out when I or anyone else reviews your CV is your commitment to research, like well over 100 publications. And now, since 2021, you've also been the division chief at the University of Michigan. And so, how do you transition from saying, all right, I'm a busy academic surgeon, to now I'm a busy academic and administrative surgeon? So what's that transition like, and how do you balance it?
So I think timing is important. So certainly early on in my career, and this is in large part because of being a fellow at Boston Children's and just seeing all the amazing research that was being done there, I was really inspired to become a clinical researcher, but also be a very productive clinician and surgeon. And so, one very useful piece of advice that I remember Jim Castor giving me before I completed my fellowship was take advantage of the first few months when you're out in practice and you're not that busy to jumpstart your research career. So I really took that to heart. I have a specific interest in early onset scoliosis, so it's hard to do single center studies, especially if you're at a smaller institution. And so I quickly found ways to be involved in study groups, such as the pediatric spine study group, and also just reach out to friends at other institutions and do multi-center studies. So I think that really kind of helped jumpstart my research career early on. And then, as you pointed out, I didn't become the division chief of pediatric orthopedic surgery until I'd been in practice for a decade. And so at that point, I felt like my research program was pretty solid. And so I was ready to take on some additional leadership and administrative roles.
So the other thing that is really kind of interesting when you look at your kind of research portfolio is the sheer volume of medical students, residents, and research assistants that you have mentored. I was trying to count it up, but I literally couldn't count high enough before we had to get on and do the podcast. But it's a lot. And so, what is your kind of best advice on shepherding young researchers across the finish line? Because I think that's one of the hardest parts, getting a research project done without being too handsy.
Well, I think first of all, you yourself have to be a finisher too. So if you ask somebody else to take the lead on one of your projects and they send you, questions, or they send you a draft and you don't get back to them, then you're not sort of holding up your end of the deal. And you also have to recognize that whether it's a medical student or a resident or a fellow or even a junior faculty that you're mentoring, their background when it comes to the research topic may have varying levels of like there may be varying levels in terms of the understanding of the study question. And so you have to, certainly with a medical student, you'll have to be a little bit more hands-on in terms of guiding them through the whole process, whereas with a fellow, you may not need to be as hands-on. So just kind of recognizing the experience and the background of the trainee that you're working with, I think is really important. And then also setting a timeline. So with medical students, I know if they approach me to do research as a first-year med student, this is going to end up probably being a longer-term project just because they're very busy with school. Whereas with a resident or a fellow, usually it's a little bit of a shorter time frame because the residents may have a research block where they're really trying to get something done. And with a fellow, obviously, they're trying to get something completed before the end of their fellowship year.
I think that's pretty great advice. And I like the very first thing you said is that you have to be a finisher. You have to be a closer yourself. Yeah.
Right.
You can't depend on anyone else for it. And so during your time on the board of directors, which is really just starting, right? So I think at the annual meeting a few months ago, you officially took your place. Do you have any specific goals in mind or things that you hope to accomplish?
Well, I mean, I think it's always interesting when you're on the board, because I'm on the board of one of our local theaters, which Jeff Daniels, the actor, started 30 years ago. So it was the same thing when I joined that board. I think it's very important to listen initially. So like at my first board meeting at the annual meeting, I mean, certainly I chimed in here and there, but I think listening is just always so important when you're new in any role. And so just to kind of see all the inner workings and just all of the different courses and collaborations that the SRS is involved in with other spine societies internationally. How much it costs to run a meeting. I mean, these are all little things that you would never really pay attention to as an SRS member, but I think is really important in terms of the future of SRS. So I would say right now I'm still really kind of learning and listening more than talking. And so I guess at this point, I'm still not totally sure how I can contribute specifically and if I have any goals during my 2 years on the board, because I'm still just trying to listen and learn.
I think those are pretty good goals for all of us. I probably should do a little bit more of that myself. All right. And so the final question, we're going to step outside of the realm of academics and research. So when you're not listening to the scoliosis dialogues or you're not reading about spine surgery, what are you reading? What are you listening to? How are you enriching your life away from our field?
Well, one of the books that we had to read for, I'm trying to remember if this was a book I had to read for lead or if it was for a different leadership program, but it was Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And I don't know, I've read a lot of leadership books, and that one, like, I feel like still really resonates with me. And I actually drew inspiration from his book when I designed the program for ICHIOS this past year as I was program chair, because I think like life gets so busy. We, just go to work, do the same thing every day. And then at the end of the day, you're like, don't even remember why you're doing this, doing this every day. So I think that book really resonates with me. Start with why, and it just kind of brings you back to square one if you have those days where you just feel like you're on autopilot. I'm trying to think of what else I've read recently that was really good. There's a book called Super Communicators, which is another book that it was actually a book that my husband had read for a leadership program, which I think really just helps you learn how to communicate with people just with different backgrounds, and especially in a tense situation, if you're trying to figure out how to diffuse a situation, which certainly the more you step into these different leadership roles, the more you're going to be in these situations where you need to learn how to communicate and have conversations with, diverse groups of people.
I think that's a pretty good answer. And so I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I want to thank you not only for your previous, but for your future service to the SRS and its membership. And I'd like to remind everyone that registration is open for the IMAST meeting, which is going to be 2026 in Toronto. That'll be our 33rd IMAST, and I hope to see everyone there. Thanks so much, Ying.
All right. Thank you for having me.
As we continue our special series introducing the new SRS Board of Directors, I am thrilled to be joined today by a leader who truly embodies the global mission of our society. Dr. Brian Su is an adult and pediatric spine deformity surgeon in Sydney, Australia. After completing his training in Australia, he pursued high volume fellowships in the United States at two world renowned centers, UCSF in San Francisco and Twin Cities Spine Center in Minneapolis. Dr. Su is a former chairperson for AO Spine Australia and New Zealand and the founder of the Deformity Down Under meeting. Brian now steps into a new chapter as a director at large on the SRS board. Today, we're going to discuss his journey across a few continents, his research into complex spine reconstructions, and his vision for an expanded leadership role in the SRS. Brian, it's 10 o'clock for you. It's 5 a.m. for us. Thank you for staying up late to record with us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you for inviting me on the show.
So I want to get right into it. And so I went over your CV before we started this interview because I'm not sure that you and I have ever met. But you have this amazing blend of Australian, Asian, and even North American influences. And this really seems to make you an excellent representative for an evolving global organization like the SRS. So tell us a little bit about your educational background as well as your training.
Of course, Grant. Yes, you're correct. I don't think we have met directly in person in the past, but I grew up in Hong Kong. My father was a spine surgeon in Hong Kong, and I actually knew Ken Chung, our past president, I think I met him when I was still in primary school. So we sort of grew up in that era. I then studied medicine in Australia, Sydney, Australia, and finished my orthopedic training there. And then I went and, as you mentioned before, to the US to do 2 fellowships. And then I've been practicing in Sydney, Australia since then. So it has been a multi-continent sort of journey, if you like.
And so you mentioned our previous SRS president, Dr. Ken Chung. So what relationships from your training have proven to be most important or fruitful going forward in your career?
Oh, I think if I look back at the relationships or the training and basically looking at the whole spine family, it's really all relationships. So, in Hong Kong, my father was there and spine surgery and all his friends and people I met was all in the spine family, if you like. When I went to Twin Cities to train as a fellow, Bob Winter was there, John Lonsine and Ansel Transfield treated me like basically family. And so I felt very welcome. And that was all part of my experience as being a family in spine. And then at UCSF, Grant, they talk about these uncomfortable Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners when you have all sorts of family members. So I was a co-fellow with Rajiv Sethi at UCSF. And one of those Monday morning pre-surgery, pre-OR sort of meetings that you go through the whole week's cases, and you have David Bradford, Sig Bervin, and Serena Hu there. That's quite a gathering for every Monday morning. So we basically grew up with relationships all within in spine in different aspects. So it's been really fun, and it's been it's all, I would say, all about relationships in terms of being in the spine world.
Well, you've built a pretty amazing spine family, it sounds.
Absolutely, and I would definitely call, Rajiv and we catch up as much as we can, and he's my brother, and John Lonstein and others looked after me, and even Ken Chong is still looking after me after all these years. So definitely, it's a wider family, I'd say.
And so, having trained and now practicing for quite a while, what do you see are the biggest differences in how spine deformity care is practiced between the two hemispheres?
Unfortunately, to say the real really difference, unfortunately, is a lot of the time the insurance dynamics and the payor dynamics. Um, I In Australia, we have a very good system where insurance payment is still exist, whereas every time you talk to my North American colleagues, they talk about how Medicare and the decline of even though you have a great economy, but somehow it gets affected. The care is somehow affected, even though the economy is so great. And then I see my fellow colleagues in Southeast Asia, in China, and even in Hong Kong, where the government budget or the hospital budget almost dictates how you would treat patients. So really, I think, unfortunately, the payor and payee system really governs a lot of things that we do. Luckily, in Australia, we're still holding on just barely.
It's so, in terms of just kind of maybe transitioning into your research and practice, you've published on spinal cord injuries, neuromonitoring, and you even have an advanced degree in neurophysiology. And so, do you have foresight or maybe hopes for future advances on our neuromonitoring technique?
Look, the neuromonitoring part is really, I've been really fortunate because I learnt at UCSF and Twin City of how to do it consistently with all cases. And, I've actually done some publishing, and we did some animal studies with Stan Skinner, who was fantastic neurophysiologist and really thoughtful scientist in that regard. And I was able to come back to Australia. And at that point, when I started practice in Australia, neurophysiological monitoring, intraoperative monitoring was scarce, to say the least. So there was one or two hospitals. If you were doing maybe big scoliosis corrections, you may get some SSCP monitoring and inconsistent sort of type of, or at least, the equipment was very low key and very basic. But over the years, I've pushed and I've brought in all the techniques that I've seen on my fellowship. And now, neurophysiology in Australia has really come up to the standard that I would say when I learnt as a fellow, which was about 15 years ago.
So you have an interest in certainly a global reputation for your spine deformity and your complex osteotomy work. For some of our early career listeners to the podcast, and honestly for me too, what are a few tips you would give us when you're planning these cases?
Well, in terms of planning these cases, I think number one is, understanding whether you need to do it. If you really need to do something so complex is probably number one. But whatever the case is, whether it's a complex osteotomy or just a difficult case, one of the things I would suggest, try and do as many courses, particularly cadaveric courses. Talk to mentors. I took as much of the opportunities I could get to actually get hands-on with cadaveric specimens to actually get a feel of it when you're trying to execute some of these complex and cases that you don't do very often. But one of the things I would advise is you should always come back to the basics, meaning that you're doing a PSO or some osteotomy, but all your other parts, the easy parts, you've got to execute well and execute efficiently. Because if you take a long time doing the simple stuff and the other stuff, like putting the screws in, doing a dissection, by the time you get to doing the complex part, your team's tired, everyone's tired, patients on the table for a long time. So that is the complex part, but getting the small stuff done efficiently and well is probably the most important thing.
That's a really, really great tip. You've still got to have gas in the tank when it comes
Absolutely.
time to do your osteotomies and your correction.
Yeah.
Thanks. And so I want to talk a little bit about your leadership role. So, in addition to your role with the SRS, you founded and run the Deformity Down Under meeting.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this conference and what you have in store for the future.
Uh, so when I first started, oh, actually not, maybe after I started practice 2 or 3 years, um, we started, this company came up in Sydney, and they were selling this spine stuff called K2M. And so I started using it. And I said, okay, I was happy with it. So I continue with it. And they wanted to support me in some way, whether it's research or whatever. And at that point, I said, look, I'm really passionate in terms of education, and I want to set up a meeting that we can actually discuss local, orientated, locally interested topics in spine so that we can invite international speakers and we continue to learn from overseas speakers. Because one of the things I've learned from attending a lot of courses, you can go and hear the latest abstracts, or you can hear a lecture or two. It's really when you sit down with some of these international speakers and you talk to them one-on-one and say, what do you actually do? And how do you actually do this? That you actually, learn, the latest techniques. And so we set up this meeting to be a friendly, local, almost conversive type of meeting where people talk, and they talk during the meeting, you talk after the meeting. It's very relaxed. We're not standing on any ceremony. It's not run by any particular society, so no one has to, wear particular hats or anything like that. So that's that particular flavor that we've run this Deformity Down Under. And actually, after this conversation meeting, a committee, organizing committee, because we started this same concept in the Southeast Asia countries, where each country will have their own particular flavor or particular way they do things. And what I mentioned before, the hospital budgets and the country medical budgets play a big role. And so sometimes what we talk about in Australia is not necessarily interesting in Philippines or Indonesia, where we've run 2 meetings already. So that's what we're aiming to do with this concept of deformity down under.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so taking the things you've learned from that in beginning this new role in the SRS board, are there any specific goals that you have in mind for your tenure?
What I've learned over time in terms of these, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a society, and I love the SRS, and I just really want to contribute. And what I've learned is you got to play with the team, all right? There's only one quarterback. There's probably only one wide receiver that will get the ball. But if you don't do your job as a tackle, the quarterback's not going to throw the ball. So it's all part of the whole team to work together so that we can achieve something. And one of the greatest assets of the SRS is its people. We have all the top people that we work well together, and they work as a team, and we can advance this society together. And that's my hope that I can contribute in that.
So you've made some football references there. Or is that American rules football or Australian rules football?
Oh no, that was particularly for your listeners, and the American NFL. I do watch a lot of rugby, but it is the NFL season, and we do get good coverage of that as well.
But it's one of the other things I really found interesting when reading about you and looking at your CV is that you were an anatomy prosector, and you actually won a prize for your anatomical dissections. And so, is there a specific approach or dissection that is your particular favorite?
Oh, that was a long time ago. That anatomy prosection, that was back in the medical school days. It wasn't a particular approach. The dissection was of a knee, but I found out early in my young years that I am quite interested in detail and delicate things, and picking out or working out the best procedure, even if it's delicate. Actually at one stage I was actually quite interested in hand surgery and digital nerve repairs and things like that, some sort of the really delicate stuff. But in the end, I found my way back to spine, and I think spine gives me that combination of really big picture and physical stuff and bending rods and things like that, but also the delicate and finer intricate part of the surgery that still interests me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Brian, do you have any last words or thoughts for the listeners of the Scoliosis Dialogues?
Well, I hope anyone who's listening to the dialogues would consider joining us as a member. And if you're already a member, please join us as part of any committees, or come up to us and ask for any help that you can give us. We have a few meetings coming up this year. We have a new Asia Pacific meeting in Fukuoka in Japan. We have IMAS coming up in Canada, and then of course in Australia for our annual meeting. So I hope that we will see you there over these different meetings over the year.
Well, Brian, thank you for being here with us today on the podcast. Thank you for your service to the Scoliosis Research Society and for building a spine deformity family and sharing it with us. I look forward to seeing you at the meetings that we were talking about and getting to know you better. For our listeners, just as Brian mentioned, housing and registration are open for the IMAS meeting in Toronto. The dates this year are April 15th through 17th, and it promises to be an incredible meeting. And I hope to see everyone there. So thank you for listening to the Scoliosis Dialogues, and have a great day.